Hi everyone, this is Ahsan Raza from Century 21 Innovative. I hope you guys are all doing well and keeping safe out there. Today I have a very special guest on the show. We have Dan Schofield here, litigation paralegal and partner at SFG Paralegal Services. Hi Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So the reason why I brought Dan here is because a lot of my database are investors, clients, both landlords and also tenants, and they've had a lot of questions about, in terms of rent, what are the new rules and regulations? Are there any new rules and regulations? How should they navigate in this market, in this crisis? So hopefully you can provide some insight on that. And just to begin, the first question I had, I think is on everybody's mind, is that, what are the new rules regarding tent? Are there even new rules? How are people navigating that if you're a tenant in the COVID crisis right now?
So officially, the government, neither the federal nor provincial governments, have introduced any legislation that changes the Residential Tenancies Act requirement for a tenant to pay rent. Now, the Premier has made some statements of, look, don't worry about it. If you can't pay it, you're not going to get evicted. And what they've done is they've put a moratorium on sheriff's evictions and hearings, because the Landlord and Tenant Board is closed at the moment, for anything other than something that's a threat to personal safety. So some people have taken that to mean I don't have to pay my rent. Now, in the sense of, if you have nothing, how can you give something? That's true. But their obligation to pay rent has not changed. So a landlord, a real estate investor, should still be taking the legal steps that are available to them to protect the ability to collect that rent at a later time. Okay. One of the things that we often discuss is, what should that step be, right? So prior to COVID, if rent was due on the 1st and it wasn't paid, our advice was, on the 2nd, you should serve a notice of non-payment of rent. That hasn't changed. Okay. Now, do I believe that a landlord and tenant board adjudicator is going to issue an eviction order for a tenant that did not pay rent during COVID-19? The answer to that is, under certain circumstances, yes, and under certain circumstances, no. Now, we have no direction on this because this is an unprecedented thing. I'm relying on the fact that I am in front of a board member probably 10 times a month. And as a result of that experience, this is what I believe to be true. I could be wrong, and it could be very case specific. So my belief is that Section 83 of the Residential Tenancies Act allows an adjudicator to deny an eviction if there are compelling reasons for them to do so, even if the application is proven. So if you have a tenant who, up until April 1st or May 1st, paid their rent on time, in full, all the time, and due to their loss of job, due to a layoff, due to circumstances outside that tenant's control, they were no longer able to pay rent, I believe that as long as there was open communication between the tenant and the landlord, and a payment plan or something put in place between the tenant and the landlord, that the board will most likely not order an eviction. Having said that, if the person prior to COVID-19 had a history of non-payment of rent, had a history of late payment of rent, when their landlord reached out to them on multiple occasions and said, hey, what's going on? I haven't heard from you. And they never responded, or didn't try and respond, or didn't try and come to a payment arrangement with their landlord, I believe that an eviction would still be possible. So it's about reasonableness.
Yeah.
And I think adjudicators are going to look at that. So I give you a long-winded answer to your question, but the reality is that nothing's changed. Rent is still due.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the follow-up question to that is, there seems to be the notion that there might need to be some cooperation between landlords and tenants that they should take amongst themselves. So like, what would you advise, a landlord today? You know, should he show some flexibility? Should he be more cooperating to the tenants given the situation if they really can't pay rent or if they've lost their jobs? Like, what are you telling, just from a morally and ethical standpoint, I guess, as well, right? Like, what would you suggest, you know, how they cooperate between each other right now?
Well, I mean, you can't get blood from a stone, right? So if your tenant is really destitute and really, you know, has experienced a significant drop in income, you know, a lot of places, let's say they're renting a $2,000 a month unit, it's probably not realistic to expect them to give the entire $2,000 of their CERB or unemployment insurance to the landlord and live on nothing.
Yep.
So I think a landlord should be flexible and should show that they're willing to be flexible. And I think that that flexibility will go a long way once hearings are available again, as to whether or not an adjudicator at the Landlord and Tenant Board would order an eviction. So if they see a landlord saying, listen, I understand that these things happen to you. I understand that this is unavoidable. I understand that we can't do anything about it. Can you pay $200 a month, $500 a month, $700 a month? Can you give me $100 every 2 weeks? Whatever that amount may be, to show that they're flexible, but they still have to have some rental income, or they still would like to have some rental income. I think that that goes a long way. I advise that all that communication should be either done in writing, whether it be text message or email, so that it's easily referenced later on. If the landlord hasn't already done so, and they communicate with their tenant by phone, they might want to possibly download something like ACR, automatic call recorder, so they can record the conversations with their tenants, so that those are easily referenced and available later on down the road. But definitely something, you know, that flexibility from a moral and ethical perspective, I think the adjudicators will take that a long way. And also, you know, a lot of the people that are going to have these problems, it's unavoidable. It's not something they wanted to do. Now, if you had a tenant who was a non-paying tenant before, or a late paying tenant before, this will just increase that behavior.
Yeah.
But you should still, you know, correspond in writing as much as possible to try and have a document of everything that's going on.
Okay, no, that's great insight. Is there anything else that you wanted to share? Any last words or advice that you can provide?
Well, I know that some of my clients who are landlords have decided that they might want to sell their units, and during this whole crisis. And I know that the media has talked about home sales being down, but my realtor clients have actually experienced the opposite. They're actually getting more phone calls now than they were before. So just keep in mind that whenever possible, you should try and do showings virtually. Try and not enter the unit if at all possible. I know that the Toronto Real Estate Board and OREA have some guidelines that they've set out in regards to that. More importantly, though, hire an agent who understands the market, because right now it's virtually impossible for you to guarantee a vacant possession on a fast close.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have a realtor like yourself who's experienced and knowledgeable about the market, and you understand that that's not a possibility right now, you are going to negotiate a deal accordingly, and you are far more secure in that regard.
Okay. Great. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. And we'll be posting Dan's information in this post below. So if you need any services in regards to what we discussed about, feel free to reach out to him. They're still working and operating, and they'll be able to help you out with your properties. Thanks so much, Dan. Have a wonderful day and stay safe.
Thank you very much. You too.
Take care.